They called me selfish when I said no to giving away my son's $150,000. You know that feeling when your heart just stops for a second? Not from fear or panic, but from pure, raw joy hitting like a freight train? That's exactly what happened last Tuesday when my 17-year-old son Leo was hunched over his laptop at our kitchen table, spooning cereal into his mouth with one hand, while scrolling through emails with the other. The acceptance letter from MIT appeared on his screen like a digital miracle. Full ride, complete scholarship. Every parent's dream wrapped up in Time's new Roman font and official letterhead. I watched Leo's face transform from casual morning drowsiness to wide-eyed disbelief. His spoon hung suspended halfway to his mouth as he read the email twice, then 3 times. The kid who usually played everything cool suddenly looked like he'd been struck by lightning. My wife, Sarah, rushed over from the coffee maker, still in her nursing scrubs from a night shift. She read over Leo's shoulder and let out this strangled sound that was half sob, half victory cry. We've been a team through 18 years of marriage, through every late bill and every sacrifice, and this moment felt like all those years of pinching pennies and choosing generic brands had finally paid off. The celebration that night was everything you'd expect from a middle-class family in suburban Ohio. Sarah made Leo's favorite lasagna. I broke out the good wine, and we called Leo's grandparents on both sides. My in-laws were thrilled, asking all the right questions about dormitories and course catalogs. They understood what this meant for Leo's future. But there was something else brewing in my chest that night, something I hadn't felt in decades. See, MIT had been my dream too, back when I was Leo's age. I used to spend hours in our garage, tinkering with solar panel prototypes and sketching designs for more efficient energy systems. My grandfather, rest his soul, used to say I had the mind of an inventor and the heart of someone who could change the world. That dream got shelved when I graduated high school in 1993. My family needed me to stay local, help with expenses, be the responsible son. So I went to Ohio State instead, got my engineering degree, and landed a steady job at a manufacturing plant. Good benefits, decent pay, nothing to complain about. But sometimes, late at night when I was fixing something in the garage, I'd catch myself wondering what might have been. Now, watching Leo live out the dream I'd put aside, I felt this weird mixture of pride and something that tasted like old regret. Not bitter regret, mind you, more like the bittersweet realization that sometimes the greatest gift you can give your kid is the chance to chase the dreams you had to abandon. After dinner, when the dishes were cleared and Leo was upstairs probably texting every friend he'd ever made, I sat him down for one of those father-son talks that actually matters. I told him about the college fund we'd been building since he was born. $150,000, saved penny by penny over 17 years. Money we'd scraped together from birthday gifts, tax returns, overtime shifts, and countless small sacrifices. The plan had always been simple. This money would pay for Leo's education, no matter where he chose to go. But now, with the full scholarship covering everything, that fund had transformed into something else entirely. I looked my son in the eye and told him the truth. This wasn't just college money anymore. This was his head start in life, his chance to graduate debt-free and chase whatever came next without the crushing weight of student loans. Leo just nodded, but I could see he understood the magnitude of what we were saying. This was freedom money. This was dream-chasing money. This was the kind of financial foundation most kids his age could only fantasize about. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. We'd done it. We'd actually managed to give our kid the kind of opportunity that changes everything. The American dream, real and tangible, sitting in our savings account with compound interest and 18 years of hope attached to it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather's old workshop, about the solar panel designs I'd abandoned when life got in the way. There's this quote from Marcus Aurelius that stuck with me from a philosophy class in college. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. Maybe, just maybe, Leo's success was giving me permission to dust off some old dreams of my own. The next morning started like any other Wednesday. Coffee brewing at 6 a.m. Sarah getting ready for her day's shift at the hospital. Leo practicing his presentation for AP Physics. Normal life. Except everything felt different now. There was this electricity in the air, like we were all walking around with secret that made ordinary moments feel extraordinary. I decided to call my mother and share the good news. Family is important, right? Your kid gets into MIT on a full ride. You want to spread that joy around. I expected congratulations. Maybe some tears of happiness. Definitely some bragging about her grandson to her bridge club friends. What I got instead was a conversation that made my blood run cold. Mom answered on the second ring, her voice already carrying that particular tone she uses when she's got an agenda. After the obligatory small talk about weather and Sarah's work schedule, I dropped the news about Leo's scholarship. For exactly 3 seconds, she sounded genuinely happy. Then I heard the shift, that subtle change in tone that meant she was calculating something. The congratulations turned into questions about the college fund. How much was in there exactly? What were our plans for that money now? That Leo wouldn't need it for tuition? Had we considered that this windfall was really a blessing for the whole family? That last question hit me like a slap. I asked her what she meant, though deep down I already knew where this was heading. My stomach was already forming knots. She launched into what I now realize was a carefully rehearsed pitch. My niece Emily, my brother Mark's 25-year-old daughter, had this amazing business opportunity. Some kind of boutique concept that was guaranteed to succeed if she could just get the initial investment. The family had been discussing it, apparently. Everyone agreed it was exactly the kind of venture that could benefit from some seed money. My mother's voice took on this falsely casual tone as she suggested that maybe, since Leo's education was now covered, it would be nice if I could help Emily get her start in business. After all, family helps family, and wouldn't it be wonderful if Leo's good fortune could create opportunities for his cousin too? I stood there in my kitchen, phone pressing my ear, feeling like I was watching a train wreck in slow motion. The woman who raised me, who taught me about right and wrong, was essentially asking me to hand over my son's future to fund my brother's kid's latest get-rich-quick scheme. See, Emily has a history. This wouldn't be her first business venture. There was a photography studio that lasted 6 months, the online jewelry store that never sold a single piece, the fitness coaching certification that went nowhere, each failure funded by family money, each disappointment followed by explanations about market conditions and bad timing, and everything except personal responsibility. I tried to explain to Mom that the money wasn't really available, that we had planned for Leo's future beyond just college. Graduate school, maybe, a house down payment eventually, the foundation for a life where he wouldn't have to struggle the way Sarah and I did in our early years. But Mom wasn't hearing any of it. Her tone shifted from casual suggestion to barely concealed pressure. She started talking about family loyalty, about how we'd all supported each other through difficult times. She reminded me of favors from years past, of times when the family had helped us out financially. The conversation ended with her saying they'd discuss it more at Thanksgiving dinner next week. Just like that, our family celebration had been turned into an ambush. I hung up the phone and just stood there for a long moment, staring at the wall where we keep Leo's school photos. Kindergarten through senior year, 17 little faces showing progression from gap-toothed kid to young man heading to MIT. Each photo represented years of our lives, choices we made, sacrifices we accepted. Sarah found me there 10 minutes later. She took one look at my face and knew exactly what had happened. See, this wasn't our first rodeo with my family's creative approach to wealth redistribution. Over the years, we'd weathered requests for everything from car loan co-signing to emergency money for various crises that somehow always seemed to coincide with our financial milestones. Sarah's reaction was immediate and surgical. She started pacing around the kitchen, her nursing training making her approach the problem like a medical crisis that needed triage. First, she wanted to know exactly what Mom had said. Then she wanted to analyze the likely response if we refused. Finally, she wanted to strategize about Thanksgiving dinner. We both knew this was just the opening move in a chess game we never wanted to play. My family doesn't take no for an answer easily, and they have decades of experience in applying pressure through guilt, manipulation, and what they like to call family obligation. Sarah suggested we make a bet, half joking but also deadly serious. She wagered $50 that my brother Mark would ask for a small loan before the turkey was even served. I countered with a $100 bet that Dad would launch into a speech about family unity, which really translates to unity around my wallet. We were laughing, but it was that dark kind of humor you develop when you're dealing with people who consistently put you in impossible situations. The kind of laughter that's really a survival mechanism, a way to cope with the fact that people you love keep treating you like a personal ATM. That evening, Leo asked if everything was okay. Kids pick up on tension, even when you think you're hiding it well. I told him about the phone call with Grandma, keeping it light but honest. Leo's response surprised me. He said he'd been worried something like this might happen, that Grandma had made some weird comments about college costs when he talked to her the week before. My 17-year-old son had already figured out what it took me 30 minutes to process. Our family victory was going to become someone else's opportunity. Our carefully saved dreams were going to be viewed as available resources for other people's plans. The next few days passed in this strange state of suspended animation. Sarah and I went through our normal routines, but underneath everything was this growing dread about Thanksgiving dinner. We'd already committed to going, already promised Leo we'd celebrate his MIT acceptance with extended family. I caught myself doing mental math constantly. How much could we reasonably refuse to give without creating a permanent rift in the family? How much pressure were they planning to apply? What would happen if we just said no and stuck to it? The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't really about the money. This was about power and control, and the way some families operate like little dictatorships where success is viewed as a shared resource rather than a personal achievement. My family had always had this mentality that individual accomplishments belong to the collective, especially when those accomplishments involve money. I started thinking about my grandfather again, about the way he used to encourage my inventions and my dreams. He was the only one who ever talked to me about building something of my own, about creating rather than just getting by. Everyone else in the family seemed content with their steady jobs and predictable lives, but Grandpa understood ambition. There was this one conversation we had when I was 15, sitting in his basement workshop while he fixed an old radio. He told me that most people spend their lives trying to make everyone else happy, and in the process, they forget what makes them happy. He said the trick to life was figuring out which dreams were worth protecting, even from people who claimed to love you. At the time, I thought he was just being dramatic. Now, 30 years later, I was starting to understand what he meant. The night before Thanksgiving, Sarah and I packed our bags like we were preparing for battle rather than a family dinner. We strategized about seating arrangements, conversation topics to avoid, and exit strategies if things went bad. We coached Leo about staying neutral if the adults started arguing about money. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were treating a family celebration like a military operation because we knew our relatives were planning to ambush us with financial demands disguised as family loyalty. As we loaded the car that Thursday morning, I caught sight of myself in the side mirror. 48 years old, successful enough by any reasonable measure, married to a woman I adore, father to a kid who was heading to MIT. By every metric that matters, I was winning at life. So, why did I feel like I was driving toward a battlefield where my own family was going to be shooting at me? Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand as we pulled out of the driveway. 20 years of marriage gives you a kind of telepathy, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. We'd worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let anyone, even family, derail our son's future. Leo was in the back seat with his headphones on, probably listening to some podcast about quantum physics or artificial intelligence, completely unaware that his college fund had become the center of a family drama that was about to explode over Thanksgiving dinner. As we drove toward my parents' house, I found myself thinking about that Marcus Aurelius quote again. Very little is needed to make a happy life. Maybe the problem wasn't that we didn't have enough. Maybe the problem was that some people could never have enough, especially when they were spending other people's money to get it. The highway stretched out ahead of us, leading toward a confrontation I'd been avoiding for 30 years. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt ready for whatever was waiting. Leo's success had given me something I'd forgotten I possess: the courage to protect what mattered most, even from the people who were supposed to love us unconditionally. We were driving toward more than just Thanksgiving dinner. We were driving toward the moment when I'd finally have to choose between keeping the peace and keeping my integrity. And as my grandfather's old workshop wisdom echoed in my mind, I realized the choice had already been made. Walking into my parents' house, that Thanksgiving felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone except me had already rehearsed their lines. The colonial-style home looked exactly the same as it had for the past 20 years. Same beige walls, same family photos arranged in perfect symmetry, same smell of cinnamon and turkey that used to mean comfort but now felt like a trap. My brother Mark was waiting in the entryway with his arms spread wide, flashing that 1,000-watt smile he perfected during his brief stint in car sales. The hug he gave me lasted about 3 seconds too long, and felt like he was patting me down for loose change. His wife Jennifer hovered nearby, clutching a bottle of wine like a shield and making that high-pitched small talk that people use when they're nervous about something. Emily appeared from the living room, 25 years old, and looking like she'd stepped out of an Instagram influencer's fever dream. Designer jeans, perfect makeup, that studied casual look that probably took 2 hours to achieve. Her smile never quite reached her eyes, and when she hugged Leo, I caught her sizing him up like he was a prize she was calculating the value of. The house was decorated with that Martha Stewart-level perfection that my mother had mastered over the decades. Fall leaves arranged just so, candles that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill, and enough coordinated autumn colors to make a department store display look understated. Everything looked beautiful and felt completely artificial. Dad emerged from his favorite recliner, like a king holding court, wearing his traditional Thanksgiving uniform of khakis and a sweater that Mom had probably laid out for him. He shook hands with Leo and made the appropriate grandfather noises about MIT, but I could see him doing math in his head. His eyes had that calculating look I'd learned to recognize over the years, the same expression he'd worn when he convinced me to co-sign Mark's first business loan 15 years ago. The preliminary skirmishes began immediately. Mom asked about our drive, while simultaneously steering us toward the living room, where she'd arranged the seating like a chessboard. Sarah and I ended up on the couch facing the entire family, with Leo positioned between his grandparents like some kind of human buffer zone. Mark launched into his traditional holiday monologue about his latest business ventures. He'd moved on from car sales to some kind of consulting work that he described in deliberately vague terms involving synergy and market optimization. Jennifer nodded along like she was hearing this information for the first time, though I suspected she'd been subjected to this pitch multiple times a day for months. Emily chimed in with updates about her career in social media marketing, which seemed to involve a lot of posting photos of coffee and motivational quotes. She kept steering the conversation toward entrepreneurship and taking risks, throwing around buzzwords like disruption and innovation with the confidence of someone who'd watched too many TED Talks. The dinner preparation became a carefully choreographed dance of passive aggression. Mom assigned tasks based on some invisible hierarchy, where Sarah and I ended up doing most of the actual work, while Mark and Emily provided commentary and supervision. Dad retreated to his chair with a beer, occasionally shouting observations about football games from the safety of the living room. During the cooking process, I started noticing the tactical positioning. Emily kept finding excuses to talk to Leo about college and his future plans. Mark made several references to family loyalty and supporting each other through difficult times. Mom dropped hints about the importance of sharing good fortune with people you love. The dinner table itself was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, disguised as holiday tradition. Mom had used her good china, the stuff that only came out for major occasions and funerals. The centerpiece was an elaborate arrangement of gourds and flowers that probably cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. Every detail was perfect, which somehow made everything feel more ominous. We sat down around 6:30, and the initial conversation stayed safely in neutral territory. Weather, sports, Leo's upcoming graduation ceremony. Sarah made appropriate comment about the food, and I complimented Dad on his carving technique. Everyone played their parts in this elaborate family theater production, but you could feel the tension building like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Mark kept glancing at Dad like he was waiting for some kind of signal. Emily's contributions to the conversation became increasingly focused on business opportunities and family investments. Mom's smile grew more strained with each passing minute. About halfway through the meal, I decided to take control of the narrative. I raised my wine glass and proposed a toast to Leo's achievement, talking about how proud Sarah and I were of his hard work and dedication. I mentioned the full scholarship, the opportunities ahead of him, and how grateful we were that he'd have the chance to pursue his dreams without the burden of student debt. For a moment, it felt like a normal family celebration. Leo blushed appropriately. Everyone raised their glasses, and there were genuine smiles around the table. I thought, maybe I'd been paranoid. Maybe this really was just going to be a regular Thanksgiving dinner where we celebrated good news and ate too much turkey. Then Dad cleared his throat and stood up, still holding his wine glass. The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. What came next was delivered with a kind of calculated precision that made it clear this speech had been rehearsed. Dad talked about family being the foundation of everything we accomplish, about how individual success really belongs to everyone who contributed to making it possible. He mentioned all the ways a family had supported each other over the years, all the times we pooled resources to help someone through a difficult period. Then came the pivot, smooth as butter and twice as slippery. Speaking of family support and shared success, he continued, the family had been discussing Leo's scholarship situation. Since the college money was now available for other purposes, they'd identified a perfect opportunity to keep that investment working within the family circle. Emily's boutique concept, he explained, represented exactly the kind of innovative thinking that could benefit from some seed capital. The business plan was solid, the market research was promising, and the potential returns were substantial. It would be a shame to let Leo's good fortune just sit in a bank account when it could be generating opportunities for the next generation of family entrepreneurs. The room fell completely silent, except for the sound of Dad's voice continuing this carefully constructed pitch. He talked about Emily's vision, her dedication, her potential for success. He mentioned market trends and consumer behavior and profit projections, like he was presenting to a board of directors instead of asking his son to bankroll his granddaughter's latest scheme. I sat there listening to this performance, feeling like I was watching a magic show where I could see all the tricks, but couldn't figure out how to expose them without looking like the villain. Every word was designed to make refusing seem selfish, small-minded, and disloyal to family values. Sarah's hand found mine under the table, her fingers intertwining with mine in a grip that felt like she was anchoring me to reality. Leo had gone very still beside me, his fork suspended halfway at his mouth as he processed what was happening to his college fund in real time. When Dad finally finished his presentation and sat back down, the silence stretched out like a rubber band about to snap. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for my response to this carefully orchestrated ambush. I could feel the weight of decades of family dynamics pressing down on the moment. All those times I'd chosen peace over principle coming back to haunt me. I took a breath and said no. Not angrily, not defensively, just a simple, clear refusal. The money was designated for Leo's future. I explained. We had plans for it that extended beyond college. Plans that would give our son the kind of financial foundation that most young people could only dream about. What happened next was like watching a coordinated military assault unfold in slow motion. Mom's eyes immediately filled with tears, and she started talking about how disappointed she was in my selfishness. Mark jumped in with accusations about jealousy and resentment, suggesting that I'd never been able to handle other people's success. Emily played her part perfectly, looking hurt and confused about why her uncle wouldn't want to support her dreams. She talked about how hard she worked on her business plan, how much this opportunity meant to her, how devastating it would be to watch it slip away because of family politics. The attack came from all sides, each family member playing their assigned role in this carefully choreographed guilt trip. They talked about family loyalty, about sharing good fortune, about the importance of investing in each other's dreams. They brought up past favors, old debts of gratitude, and emotional obligations that stretched back decades. Through it all, Dad remained silent, watching proceedings like a general observing a battle from a hilltop. He didn't need to participate in the direct assault because he knew his troops would handle the dirty work for him. I tried to explain our reasoning. But every word I spoke was twisted into evidence of my selfishness and lack of family commitment. When I mentioned Leo's future plans, they dismissed them as luxury problems that could be solved later. When I talked about financial responsibility, they accused me of being controlling and paranoid. The conversation became increasingly heated, with voices rising and accusations flying. Leo sat beside me, getting smaller and smaller in his chair, watching his college celebration transform into a family war zone. Sarah maintained her composure, but I could see the steel building behind her eyes. Finally, Dad stood up again, and everyone else fell silent. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who'd been the family patriarch for 40 years. He talked about family being like a boat, where everyone had to row in the same direction or risk having someone fall overboard. Then came the ultimatum, delivered with the kind of cold precision that made it clear this was an emotional outburst, but a calculated move. If I wasn't prepared to support the family decision about Emily's business opportunity, maybe it was time to reconsider whether my wife, my son, and I really belonged at this table. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. After 30 years of family manipulation, passive aggression, and emotional blackmail, the mask had finally come off. This wasn't about Emily's business or family loyalty or shared success. This was about power and control and the assumption that my accomplishments existed to serve other people's ambitions. I looked at Sarah, seeing my own thoughts reflected in her expression. Then I looked at Leo, expecting to see confusion or fear or teenage embarrassment about adult drama. Instead, I saw something that took my breath away. My 17-year-old son, without saying a word, reached over and placed his hand on my shoulder. The gesture was simple, but it communicated everything that needed to be said. He wasn't confused about what was happening. He wasn't embarrassed by the conflict. He was making a choice, taking a side, showing me that he understood exactly what kind of people we were dealing with. In that moment, looking at my son's calm determination and my wife's unwavering support, I felt something shift inside me. For 30 years, I've been choosing family peace over personal integrity. I've been swallowing my principles to maintain relationships with people who viewed my success as their opportunity. Standing up from that perfectly set table felt like breaking out of prison I'd been building around myself for decades. The words came easily, probably because I'd been practicing in my head for 30 years without realizing it. I told Dad he was absolutely right about the boat analogy. Family should row in the same direction. The problem was that some of us had been rowing toward building something meaningful, while others had been rowing toward spending other people's money. As we prepared to leave, the family's shock was almost comical. They'd been running the same playbook for so long that the possibility of actual resistance had never occurred to them. Mark sputtered about overreactions and family unity. Mom tried tears and guilt one more time. Emily looked genuinely confused that her carefully crafted victim routine hadn't worked. But Dad just watched us with cold calculation, already planning his next move. He'd shown his hand tonight, and now he knew where we stood. The war was no longer covert. Leo walked out first, holding his head high like he was leading a parade, instead of fleeing a family gathering. Sarah followed, her nursing training making her approach even crisis situations with calm professionalism. I brought up the rear, taking one last look at the beautiful table setting and the shocked faces around it. The front door closing behind us sounded like the end of a chapter that had been dragging on far too long. We stood on the front porch in the cold November air. 3 people who just burned bridges we'd been maintaining for decades. The silence that surrounded us wasn't empty or awkward. It was a kind of silence that comes after you finally said something that needed to be said for years. The kind of silence that feels like freedom, even when it comes with a price you're not sure you're ready to pay. Standing there in the cold, with the warm light of my parents' house glowing behind us and the uncertain darkness of the street ahead, I realized we weren't just leaving a family dinner. We were walking away from a version of ourselves that had been shaped by other people's expectations and towards something we'd have to build from scratch. The evening air felt clean and sharp against our faces. For the first time in 30 years, we had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The drive home happened in one of those heavy silences that feels like the calm before a hurricane. Leo stared out the window at the suburban neighborhoods decorated with their perfect Thanksgiving displays, while Sarah gripped the steering wheel like she was piloting us through enemy territory. I sat in the passenger seat replaying every word from dinner, feeling like I just watched my family perform surgery on my soul without anesthesia. Nobody spoke until we pulled into our driveway. Then the dam burst. Once we got inside, I started pacing around our living room like a caged animal, mumbling fragments of Dad's speech about boats and family loyalty. 20 years of suppressed anger came pouring out in a stream of consciousness rant that probably sounded like I was having a breakdown. Sarah and Leo just let me work through it, understanding that sometimes you have to let the poison out before you can start healing. I kept circling back to that moment when Dad delivered his ultimatum, the cold calculation in his voice when he essentially excommunicated us for refusing to fund Emily's latest fantasy. The more I replayed it, the angrier I got, until I was practically shouting at our living room walls about 30 years of manipulation and guilt trips. Then I stopped dead in my tracks, staring at an old photograph on our mantel. It showed me at 15, standing next to my grandfather in his basement workshop, both of us grinning over some contraption we'd built together. Grandpa had his arm around my shoulders, and you could see the pride in his eyes, the absolute certainty that his grandson was destined for something special. That photo hit me like a physical blow. Grandpa was the only person in my family who'd ever believed in my dreams, who'd encouraged my inventions and my ambitions. He used to tell me that someday I'd build something that would change the world, and he'd be there to see it happen. Suddenly, I remembered something that made my blood run cold. After Grandpa died 10 years ago, I'd packed up his workshop and brought home a box of his personal belongings. Tools, books, papers, photographs. I'd shove that box in our basement and never open it, telling myself I'd go through it when I was ready to deal with the grief. But that wasn't really why I'd avoided it. Deep down, I'd been afraid that opening that box would force me to confront the dreams I'd abandoned, the promises I'd broken to myself and to him. It would mean admitting that the spark he'd seen in me had died somewhere along the way. Standing there in our living room, with the taste of family betrayal still bitter in my mouth, I realized I wasn't looking for evidence of anything. I was looking for connection. I needed to remember what it felt like to be that 15-year-old kid who believed he could invent something amazing. Sarah and Leo followed me down to the basement without question, understanding that whatever was about to happen was important. The box sat exactly where I left it a decade ago, covered in dust and surrounded by Christmas decorations and old sporting equipment. Opening it felt like archaeological excavation. Layer by layer, I uncovered pieces of Grandpa's life and my own forgotten dreams. His favorite socket wrench set, still organized exactly the way he kept it. Notebooks filled with sketches and calculations for various projects. A wooden ruler worn smooth by decades of use. As I sorted through these artifacts of a shared passion, something strange happened. The anger that had been burning in my chest started to cool, replaced by something that felt like peace. These weren't just random objects. They were evidence of a relationship built on curiosity and creativity, proof that someone had once believed in my potential without expecting anything in return. Near the bottom of the box, I found Grandpa's copy of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, the same book that had sparked my interest in philosophy back in high school. The leather binding was cracked with age, and dozens of passages were marked with his careful handwriting in the margins. As I flipped through the familiar pages, a yellowed envelope fell out from between the chapters on virtue and wisdom. My name was written on the front in Grandpa's distinctive script, along with a note that said, "To be open when you're ready to chase your dreams again." My hands were shaking as I opened that envelope. Inside was a letter dated just 6 months before Grandpa died, written in precise handwriting of an engineer who'd spent 70 years making sure his words were exactly right. The letter started with typical grandfather observations about my work ethic and my character, but then it revealed something that stopped my heart. Grandpa had established a trust fund specifically for my education and what he called my first great invention. $50,000, set aside when I was 18, intended to give me the freedom to pursue innovation without worrying about financial security. But that money had never reached me. According to the letter, Grandpa had entrusted the fund to my parents with explicit instructions about its purpose. He'd made it clear that this wasn't family money or emergency funds. This was my launching pad, my chance to turn dreams into reality. The letter continued with a warning that chilled me to the bone. Grandpa wrote about recognizing the signs of people who would try to steal my spark, who would convince me that family obligations mattered more than personal dreams. He'd seen it happen to too many creative minds, and he was determined not to let it happen to me. The final paragraph contained a piece of advice that felt like it had been written specifically for this moment. He told me that the most dangerous thieves aren't the ones who steal your money. They're the ones who steal your belief in yourself, who convince you that your dreams are selfish luxuries instead of necessary expressions of who you are. As I finished reading, the pieces of the 30-year-old puzzle suddenly snapped into place. That $50,000 had vanished into Mark's first business venture, the printing company that folded within 18 months. My parents had convinced themselves that family loyalty meant redirecting my grandfather's investment toward my brother's immediate needs. They'd stolen my future to fund Mark's failure, and they'd been so good at it that I'd never even known the theft had occurred. For 3 decades, I believed that my family couldn't afford to support my dreams, when the truth was that they'd chosen to support someone else's instead. I showed the letter to Sarah, watching her face cycle through shock, anger, and something that looked like murderous determination. She'd known about Mark's failed business, but she'd never known about the money that was supposed to launch my career as an inventor. That's when Leo spoke up, his voice carrying a maturity that caught me off guard. He'd been watching this whole scene unfold with the analytical mind of someone who'd inherited both my engineering instincts and Sarah's practical wisdom. What he said next changed everything. He told us that they'd stolen my dream, and he wasn't going to let them do the same thing to his. Then, with the confidence of someone who'd been planning this moment for months, he asked us to follow him to the garage. What we found there took my breath away. In the corner where I usually stored lawn equipment and holiday decorations, Leo had constructed a working prototype of an advanced solar panel optimization system. It wasn't just a science fair project or teenage tinkering. This was genuine innovation, built with components he'd been collecting for 2 years and powered by algorithms he developed during his spare time. The design was elegant and functional, addressing efficiency problems that had puzzled me since my own teenage experiments with renewable energy. Looking at my son's creation, I felt something ignite in my chest that I hadn't experienced in 30 years. It was that same spark Grandpa had written about, the unshakable belief that we could build something meaningful. Standing in that garage, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects and the smell of motor oil and possibility, 3 generations of dreams suddenly converged into a single moment of clarity. Grandpa's vision, my abandoned ambitions, and Leo's fresh innovation had found each other in the most unlikely place. Leo explained that he'd been working on this project not just as a college application showcase, but as the foundation for something bigger. He'd researched the market, identified the technical challenges, and designed solutions that could actually compete in the renewable energy sector. Sarah looked at both of us with the expression of someone who just watched her family discover buried treasure in their own backyard. She started asking the kinds of practical questions that transform crazy dreams into viable business plans. Manufacturing costs, patent requirements, market research, regulatory compliance. What emerged from that late-night garage conversation was the skeleton of something that felt both impossible and inevitable. We had the technical expertise, the innovative design, and now we had the seed funding that should have launched my career 30 years ago. But more than that, we had something my family had never understood. We had genuine partnership, built on mutual respect instead of obligation. We had shared vision instead of competing agendas. We had love that didn't come with price tags and expectations. Over the next few days, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from my parents and Mark, each text more manipulative than the last. They started with hurt confusion about our abrupt departure, escalated to guilt trips about family unity, and finally devolved into threats about consequences for my selfishness. I deleted every message without responding. For the first time in my adult life, I had more important things to do than manage other people's emotional manipulation. Instead of wasting energy on anger, we channeled everything into action. I took vacation days from my regular job to work with Leo on refining his prototype. Sarah researched business formation and intellectual property law. We turned our dining room into a combination engineering lab and business planning center. The transformation was remarkable. Instead of three people living separate lives on the same roof, we became a team working toward a common goal. We argued about technical specifications and marketing strategies, but they were productive arguments between equals rather than power struggles between manipulators and victims. Leo's energy was infectious. Watching him explain complex engineering concepts with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved problem-solving reminded me why I'd fallen in love with invention in the first place. This wasn't about money or recognition. This was about the pure joy of building something that hadn't existed before. By Monday morning, we had a plan that felt both ambitious and achievable. We filed paperwork to establish Legacy Innovations as a limited liability company, opened a business bank account, and deposited the entire college fund as our initial investment. That afternoon, I did something I'd been planning since the moment I found Grandpa's letter. I opened our family group chat and posted 2 images. The first was a scan of the letter, clear enough to read every word about the stolen trust fund. The second was a photo of the 3 of us standing beside a temporary sign, reading Legacy Innovations, Solar Solutions for Tomorrow. The message I sent with those photos was simple and final. I thanked them for their financial advice about family boats and shared rowing. I acknowledged that Grandpa had invested in my future. They had invested in Mark's failure, and now I was investing in Leo's dreams. I told them this was our boat now, and we were rowing toward our own destination. Then I blocked all their numbers and deleted the group chat. 6 months later, I'm sitting in our small but modern office space, watching Leo explain thermal efficiency calculations to a potential investor over video call. Sarah walks in with coffee and the kind of satisfied smile that comes from building something meaningful with people you love. On the wall behind my desk hangs a framed article from TechCrunch about promising startups in renewable energy. Legacy Innovations gets a 2-paragraph mention that describes our patent-pending optimization system as potentially game-changing for residential solar adoption. My phone lights up with a text from Mark. The preview shows the beginning of what's obviously another attempt at reconciliation, probably motivated by whatever financial crisis Emily's boutique has created this time. For just a moment, I feel that old familiar tug of family obligation, the ingrained reflex to smooth things over and pretend nothing happened. Then I look at Leo, absorbed in his presentation, and completely confident in his ability to change the world. I look at Sarah, reviewing patent applications with the focus of someone who believes in what we're building. I pick up my phone, glance at Mark's message without opening it, and then flip the device face down on my desk. Some boats are worth abandoning. Some families are worth leaving behind. Some dreams are worth protecting, even from the people who claim to love you. As I turn back to the conversation about thermal coefficients and market penetration, I realize that Grandpa was right about everything. The most important thing isn't making everyone else happy. It's figuring out which dreams are worth protecting, and then having the courage to protect them. We're building something here that belongs to us alone, something that carries forward the best parts of what came before, while leaving the toxic parts behind. This is what legacy actually looks like, not inherited obligation, but chosen creation. The spark Grandpa saw in me didn't die after all. It just needed the right conditions to ignite again. 30 years later, in a garage filled with possibility, and surrounded by people who understand that some dreams are worth the wait.